Next up, Dr. Michael Gurstein. Is that right? He is the Executive Director of the Center for Community Informatics Research, Development and Training in Vancouver, Canada. And he's going to talk about who is Satish Shetty. And whatever that means, he's going to explain now.
I pushed. Okay. Anybody, how many here know who Satish Shetty is? Anybody? Okay. Satish Shetty is an Indian right to information activist, 38, was killed by 3 unidentified men on the morning of January 13, 2010 in Talagaon, Pune. He had been actively using the right to information to expose land scams and fake registration cases in the Talagaon, Lonavala, and Dehu Road regions of Marval in India. He was a martyr to the right to information. Satish, Mr. Shetty, was not murdered for having access to information. He was murdered for trying to use information. My notes on this were, somebody responded to my notes on this and tweeted the following. Uploading 1 million documents to the internet doesn't help people who don't know how to sift through them. Information access versus information use. How many of you here are on the information access side? How many of you aren't on the information access side? What? Okay, maybe you don't agree with this, but creating opportunities for open data, information, knowledge, government is the easy part. Creating the means to use open data, information, knowledge, government for social change is the hard part, the very hard part. Is there a data divide? What is a data divide? It's the divide between those who are able to access and use open digital data and those who aren't. The data divide, access. According to the Internet World Statistics, only 30% of the people in the world have internet access, 10% in Africa. Some 20% of the world's population owns a computer. So how many people in the world are able to directly access open data? About 500 million people use Microsoft Office. What numbers have the access to software to handle a data spreadsheet? Is that a surrogate number for that? Over half of the world's population is functionally illiterate. The average readability level of American state and federal websites is at the 11th grade level. And yet half of Americans read at the 8th grade level or lower. What proportion are able to read or comprehend open data sites? Escher, in his analysis of users and usage of the right to them site, said, the demographics of users extend traditional biases in political participation. Users are twice as likely to have a higher degree and are twice as often on a higher income, level, are more male users and over 45 years. How representative is that? In a further report, an evaluation of the theyworkforyou.org site that's been quoted here several times, the demographics of the users of these sites are those who would otherwise already be influential. Older, richer, more likely to be male, better educated. How many of you are working with the users? How many of you are aware of the users? How many of you think of the users when you're thinking of the access? All right. How many of you are concerned that those figures we just went through. 10% of the world's population has a computer. 30% of it has access to the internet. How many people are actually using the open data sets that you're creating? How much attention are you giving to making the data sets that you're making accessible, available, and useful to the users, the potential users, especially those who could make the most advantageous use of them to facilitate social change? To bridge the data divide is necessary to ensure opportunities for effective use. That is, you have to be concerned not simply with the access side, but with the user side. You have to be concerned not simply with the right to information, but with the shaddies of the world. He was murdered not because he didn't have access, but because people didn't want him to use the information. The information side is the important side. The use side is the important side, not the access side. So how do we achieve effective use? A community informatics, I do community informatics, so that's what I talk about. A community informatics approach to enabling the user to make effective use of open data would address the following factors amongst others: access, hardware, software design, content design, capability and training, support and facilitation, governance, possibly others. So access. Is there an infrastructure in place sufficient for the application? Broadband applicability, broadband capability availability. In my country, Canada, I think it's now about 70% of the population has access to broadband. 30% crucially don't. And those 30% are probably those who could make most effective use of some of the open government data that is coming available, right? But those people don't have broadband access. Is the application, the access facilitation that you're providing, does that require broadband access? And if so, doesn't that mean that many of those people who could make the most use of it, in fact, because they don't have the infrastructure in place, aren't able to use it? What's the cost of access, right? In South Africa, where I spend a fair amount of time, you're charged by the megabit for downloading information, and charged quite steeply. Charged, I think it's something like 60 megs for $30, which means that 180 megs would mean about the average salary, the average monthly earnings of somebody living in a township. What's the data requirement for the applications and the data that you're providing? Is the cost of accessing that restricting the opportunity for potential users to use it? Is there electricity to support the access? In much of Africa, having access to electricity restricts many uses of personal computers. Are there alternative ways that the access could be provided so that people are able to use the access with a computer that has a variable or has an insufficient electricity supply? Hardware. Is hardware available? Are the PCs, are there, for people who might make most effective use of this, of open data, do they have access to the hardware required to actually use the data, right, to use the application? Are there public access facilities available? Are there means available to provide low-cost computers to public housing, to housing estates, to indigenous populations? Is there a means to maintain those computers? What about disabled users who might have Some of you may be working on applications of opening data that provides information that might be of interest to disabled people to demonstrate discrimination, for example, or lack of access for disabled people to public facilities. Are the disabled people themselves able to use the data? Do they have access to computers that would allow, or other facilities that would allow them to do the kinds of analyses that would be required? Software design. What software is needed to run your application? How expensive is that software? How available is that software? What knowledge, what prior knowledge is required to run the software? Does the software have to be run by an expert to make sense of it? Somebody already mentioned that. Is it possible to? Is somebody at a local level, are they able to use the software, in fact, to achieve the application that might be useful to them? How accessible is it to the end user? Content design. What is the readability level of the content that you're providing? If the average readability level is probably, in the United States, is grade 8, 50% of the population reads or can use information at a grade 8 level or lesser. Is the information or the data that you're providing, is that usable by half, or non-usable by half the population in the United States, probably 70 or 80% of the population of the world? What do you need to do in order to make that data usable by a majority of the population in your country and the world? How usable is the content? What cognitive processing professional skills are required to use the content? Is the content only usable by a professional? A planner, for example. Do you need a lawyer to figure out how to use the information, to make use of the information in a usable way? Do you need a planner? Do you need a statistician? What about access to the disabled? What about the way in which the website or the information is presented? How accessible is that to the disabled? Have you given any thought to the design of the website based on the standards that DAISY has developed? Anybody know about DAISY here? You know about DAISY. Anybody else? Okay, so 3 people know about DAISY. You should all know about DAISY. DAISY provides standards that allows for translation of websites into a form that can be managed by the blind. That's what DAISY does. They're a consortium. You should all know about DAISY. Capability and training. Is there training available for use? Probably the open access database that I've seen that's probably the best is an epidemiological survey that's done annually by the University of Southern California, covers California. And what they do, not only do they provide an open access to the data of the results of their survey, but they also provide open training to people as to how to use the survey and the data. So anybody who wants to figure out how to use that data, there's training available for people from the community or community facilitators or activists to come and make use of the training and to be trained in how to use the data. A good example that resulted from that was there's a number of anecdotes of people families who had pretty severe asthma. They found there was a high incidence of asthma that was not statistically randomly distributed. Someone from that organization went to one of these training programs, analyzed the data, and found that there was a direct correlation between the rest sites on the freeways and incidence of asthma. That is the stuff that went into the air from trucks stopping at rest sites was a direct cause of asthma in that particular area. They were able to analyze the epidemiological study that showed asthma incidence, and they were then able to intervene with the highway authority in California to have them erect barriers and ways of mitigating that and to deal with the issues of asthma in the community. So, how many of your applications have training facilities associated with them for possible end users to make some kind of an effective use of what it is you're working on? Is there support available for a community or for low-income people, people who might make the most active use of it? Is there support and facilitation available to actually make use of the information? Do the people know about the information? Is there a communication with the information or of the application to the potential end users? Is anyone working with the potential end users to help them to understand and make use of that data, understand how the data could be made use of? I wrote something in a blog, but I'll go through it here. Tim Berners-Lee made a very significant, I think, how many of you have seen Tim Berners-Lee's TED presentation on open government? Right? Okay, a lot of you have. It's very good. It's very effective. It's a very strong one. I'm just about done. And he talks about Colville there. And he talks about how open data allowed the people of Colville, who are black, to demonstrate that they were being discriminated against in the distribution of public water. Now, the problem, that's a really good application. They want a class action suit, and they want $40 million. Problem with it was that they had access to a team of professional public health consultants from the University of North Carolina and a team of Harvard lawyers to present their case. Now, so they won $40 million. That is hardly typical of what resources a community would have access to present their case, right? It's not simply a question of making the information available and assuming that somebody out there is going to be able to attract the attention of a team of professional planners from the University of North Carolina and a team of Harvard lawyers to use their case. You have to assume that the people who could make use of the data are not going to have access to those kinds of resources. So what level of professional skill is required, in fact, to make use of the application that you're working on? And what is the governance, funding, policy enforcement of the application? I mean, in India, the right to information is probably the most significant right to information, open access law in the world at the moment in terms of right to information. The problem they've got is that there's no enforcement mechanism. And if you take a search on it, you'll find that one of the things that is very much discussed is the right to information a license to murder, as with Satish Shetty. There's a very significant concern that anybody who makes use of that law is opening themselves up to the possibility of murdering. So if you're concerned with applications, what is the enforcement? What are the mechanisms of enforcement? What are the mechanisms of linking into or using that data, in fact, in an effective way to change policy or to what are the barriers to using it? What are the funding barriers to use the information in an active way for social change? What are the policy barriers? Have you addressed those, or is there some way you can address those? Is there an issue of enforcement of regulations and sanctions? Okay, so that's my time, that's me. Other resources, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have now a lot of time for questions. Any questions here? Is that a hand raising? No. Okay. Oh, in the back there.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I think we've all been made acutely aware of just how privileged we are, particularly in this room. you have, I think, painted a really comprehensive picture of just how privileged we are. If there was a single thing that you would ask this group of people to do to really address clearly those people who don't have anywhere near the same access that we do, what would that be?
I was actually talking about that at lunchtime. Think about the users. I mean, who are they? I mean, I've been here now, we've been talking here for almost a day, and I haven't heard anyone, I don't think, talk about who the end users of these wonderful applications are. Who are the end users? What are they, I mean, in real life, who are they? Who do you want them, who do you want your users to be? I mean, who are the potential users? What's the point of doing the application if nobody's going to use the application in a useful way? Are you simply making applications for people like you, people with privilege, people with privileged access, or is what you're doing meant to serve some higher purpose? And if so, for whom? Under what circumstances? Who are those people? Have you talked to them? Do you have any idea what it is they might want to use? How they might be able to use it? What the skills they might bring to it? What processes they might follow? I mean, you folks are extremely skilled and have enormous access. How are you using that in relation to the potential needs that could be satisfied as a result? That's, I mean, I'm a strong supporter of open access, but open access for what? What's the point of it? I mean, simply creating pretty apps, as somebody described it. I mean, there's an interesting thing at an interaction at a conference. I wasn't there, but it was reported. Somebody at a conference in Texas went on and on about the wonderful app that they were developing for open government. And somebody said, well, but what do we need in order to be able to access? Do we have to spend $600 to get an iPhone in order to be able to access this wonderful app? And what does that mean in terms of people who can't or can't pay the $600 or whatever it's going to cost to access that app? Do they not have a right to have the same this was government supported. This was supported by the government of Texas, and they were going on about this pretty app that they'd created. So that's.
Any other questions? And thank you very much, Dr. Gurstein, for this different perspective on open data and open government data. Thanks.